Welcome to episode 2 of Challenge CC's cycling podcast, Rearing for Road. This week we have Eoghan Clifford, Paralympic gold medalist and multiple gold medalist at both the road and track events in the World Championships. He's also a lecturer in engineering at NUI Galway. Eoghan Clifford, how are you?
Thanks very much, Richie, and delighted to be here.
So, as a cyclist, how are you getting on during the lockdown and the pandemic?
Okay, I thought it would be worse from a training point of view. Actually, I discovered Zwift last year. I hadn't even a turbo before that. I had bought one before, but I had thrown it out. Not thrown it, I'd given it away because I never used it. So I suppose this time last year I started looking into a turbo again and got a loan of an old one. And I actually got kind of fit again actually during the lockdown. And I suppose it's, as for most people, like most cyclists, you prefer to be cycling outside and doing kind of nice long loops, etc. But it hasn't been too bad from a cycling point of view.
And what's made Zwift bearable for you?
I don't know if I should be saying this, but sometimes I'm in work meetings when I'm on it. Could be, watching something on Netflix or whatever that I wouldn't ordinarily get the chance to. Or else listen to podcasts, actually, interesting podcasts, things like that can make the hour go quickly or half hour. And in fairness, it's kind of, when you don't have much time, it's a good way to get in a decent bit of training, that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get in.
Yeah, it's like going out. It's like a woman getting dressed to go out or something, getting ready to go cycling. There's so much gear to put on. Like, it takes about an hour before you actually get on the bike.
Yeah,
and
I'm doing my turbo sessions outside because our house here isn't big enough for it. So if it's raining outside, I get wet on the turbo. So
really,
yeah, it's interesting, but still, it's you can get a good session done in half an hour, which is great.
The missus isn't giving out to you with the floor covered in sweat and.
No, she's laughing at me outside.
I see on Strava as well in Knocknacarra zigzagging over and back. It's like a child's kind of colouring.
Yeah, actually, I'll be honest, where I live is I live in the Capper Road and the Clybourne Road in Knocknacarra, and it's actually not too bad. You can get in, 400 or 500 meters of climbing up and down a few hills in an hour. And this time last year, I hadn't been in good shape for about 2 years, and I got into pretty good shape over March and April last year, just because of those little short efforts in the climbs.
Yeah, it's handy. There's a bit of everything because you're right beside the country as well.
Yeah. No, it hasn't been the worst place, I suppose, in terms of the 5K limits. You can get onto enough roads to do a decent hour training.
Yeah. And would you cycle, these lads, you see them cycling 3 or 4 hours on Zwift. Have you been able to hold on for that long on a Zwift training ride?
No, I've done one that was 1 hour and 40. That was one off, and then the most after that is 1 hour. The 1 hour and 40 was going up a couple of mountains, so I said I'd wait till the end. But generally, an hour would be the maximum, and definitely anything more than 2 hours, I wouldn't even think about it. You couldn't pay me to do it, to be honest.
I hear you. Yeah. And how did you get into cycling from an early age?
I suppose I used to cycle out to school from an early age. Like, would have been about 6 or 7 kilometers each way, from primary school even. Back in the days where you could leave a kid, I suppose, cycling out to school. You probably wouldn't leave them cycling out to school on their own now in that kind of area. But I was from a rural area in Limerick. And I used to play like a lot of other sports, rugby in particular, I would have been pretty decent at. And but I always loved cycling. I used to cycle to see my friends, if they were 10, 15 kilometers away, even at the age of 12 or 13, I wouldn't have thought anything of cycling there. And I suppose I was always kind of a sport that I loved, and I really only got into it in my late teens, early 20s, somewhat seriously. But I would have been cycling all the time before that.
And how did you get into club cycling and competing?
I moved over to Canada for a few months in I don't know, the early 2000s, and I kind of did a couple of triathlons over there and got into cycling. I was a decent runner actually, because I suppose I had that from the rugby days. I would have been a decent runner, but I kind of I suppose found that the cycling element I was pretty strong at, particularly brings out, I suppose, my strengths, which would be in endurance in that area. So when I came back to Ireland, I was in Galway and I joined Galway Bay Cycling Club. And I suppose from there, I just got addicted to it, you could say.
And I was reading there on Sticky Bottle, a kind of quote from you. It says, I remember my first race was in Navan. I was competing in the A1, A2 race and finished pretty well in the bunch. I was surprised. Now, for a lot of us lads in A4 and A3, fortunate ourselves, trying not to get dropped, kind of thinking to get to an A1, A2 race. Was that your first competitive cycling race?
Yeah, no, that was my first ever race. Yeah, it was an A1, A2. I didn't really know what the level would be like, you know. I suppose you'd have some idea from training. I was pretty lucky actually in Galway Bay. You know, there was a really strong crew, guys who would race very high, you know, national, international level, like Nigel Frode, Frankie Barrett, Sean Dygan, Keith Griffin. A lot of guys there who had raced before me, you know. Plus a lot of strong guys who weren't racing. So I had, you know, a reasonable idea, but. I slotted into the bunch pretty okay. You know, obviously it was hard, like, you know, particularly moving around the bunch, wouldn't have been used to that. But like in terms of being able to stay in the bunch, that wasn't really a big problem. It just took a while to kind of learn how to actually move with the bunch. And then obviously to be able to get out the front of the bunch was another issue altogether.
But you must have been very competitive in other sports then leading up to that, to be able to just, you know, get into cycling and make that transition so naturally.
Yeah, well, I would have been rowing. I started rowing when I went to college in NUI Galway, and I would have been a good rower. And particularly an indoor rower. I had some problems in the outdoor rowing, even though I was rowing for the university because of the disability I had. But on the indoor rower, I would have been very strong and would have been stronger than a lot of guys who would have been racing, you know, nationally. And particularly over longer distances. So like rowing is a great sport that way. I suppose I was light anyway, you know, 68, 69 kilos, and kind of rowing really brings out the endurance aspect of you, you know. So yeah, I wasn't going in, I suppose, you know, without any training beforehand.
And you were training with lads in Galway Bay, like, who were serious A1 cyclists, like, so you were bursting each other before you even got to the race.
Yeah, and also guys who would kind of, you'd learn a lot from, you know, just seeing how they moved around, even on the club spins, etc. But also when I started racing as well, then seeing how some of the lads in the club were able to move around a bunch. Like you know, it's worth an awful lot to be able to, I suppose, conserve your energy and move up and down a bunch. People really underestimate that. I think they spend a lot of time, I suppose, looking at, you know, developing the power side of things, which of course is necessary. But if a lot of that is wasted at the back of the bunch, trying to stay in the bunch, then, you know, it doesn't go to, it's not much good. So I was very lucky. I think it was a great club, a lot of really strong riders and guys who were willing to kind of, you know, share their knowledge as well, which was fantastic.
And what was it that really made you dive, you know, fully into cycling, that really gave you the buzz for it?
I suppose I would have always been interested in it, obviously, because, you know, we in the 80s and early 90s, I would have been aware of Sean Kelly, Stephen Roach competing. I suppose I loved the imagery around it, you know, the suffering, the kind of the images you'd see from Paralympic, lads caked in mud, going up mountains, you know, absolutely killing themselves. And I suppose, unlike rugby, what I really loved about it was you didn't depend on your teammates really for anything, you know. Now, maybe later on when you move up the ranks, you might a little bit more, but certainly when you're starting off, you didn't. So it was really up to you. And I suppose that aspect of it really appealed to me. And but I think there's an imagery around cycling as well that's really you don't see in any other sport. You know, the notion of going from place to place, tackling these mountains, the all weathers, etc. You know, and that kind of appealed to me.
That's the one thing that I know myself now, compared to running. Once you start cycling, the countryside just flies by. You see so much of the country, you know, mountains, you know, along by the sea. You can go down to Clare, you can go up as far as Mayo when you're back in the same, you know, in a few hours. Like, it's it really hooks you.
Yeah, and it's exactly. It's kind of liberating that way, you know. You kind of feel when you get fit, you feel you can go anywhere you want on your bike, you know.
Yeah.
And you kind of, I suppose, you get to go along a lot of roads and see a lot of things that you'd never see in a car when you're out running as well. You know, it's fantastic that way.
Yeah. And tell me, after doing your first A1 race, then where did it go from there?
Like I suppose over the years I would have stayed at A1 level, you know, through picking up various points. You know, done all the races: Tour of Ulster, Ross Moon, Des Hanlon, Tour of the North. You know, all the big races around the time, and I would have been I would have been a good, you know, decent kind of A1 rider, not a guy who could really win a whole lot of races. I mean, I had obviously disability as well, which, obviously would have hindered me quite significantly. But I suppose, I spent the years going through that. I wouldn't call it a routine because I enjoyed it, but I suppose, really testing myself against the best guys, particularly in the stage racing. I really loved that element. And I suppose between kind of mid 2000s up to the mid 2010s, I would have spent those 10 years pretty much doing most of my racing in Ireland. I did do quite a bit of racing abroad. Just a friend I knew, a Norwegian guy that I knew who raced for a team over in Norway, invited me over as part of his team to do some stage racing over there, which I actually loved because there were huge climbs there, 10, 11 kilometres at 9-10%, which suited me down to the ground. This rolling territory in Ireland doesn't really suit me a whole lot. So that was a great outlet for me as well in terms of kind of racing, getting a chance to do some racing abroad.
That must have been epic, cycling in Norway. Like, but often kind of, Google Norway, and just the roads are just so good, and the climbs, going around fjords, through tunnels, zigzagging up along the side of fjords. It must have been absolutely epic.
Yeah, it really was. I was even back there 2 years ago doing one of these long distance races they have over there, which is actually on the national calendar. It's they have these really competitive long distance races over there. But I love racing over there. I suppose one of the good things is that the weather is generally much better than here, but you do get that experience of kind of really long climbs. And also, as you said, the scenery on the west coast of Norway is just, it's absolutely stunning around the fjords area.
Yeah. So you're racing A1, but tell us about the disability and how it affected your racing, or when it kind of creeped up on you.
So I suppose I would have, as I said, I was playing a lot of rugby when I was a kid, and I was playing with Bruff, a club in Limerick. And actually we had a very strong club. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that from under 12s to under 17s, I don't remember losing a single match with the club. No, that's not because of me, by the way, but a lot of the lads went on to play for Munster, etc. A hugely strong club, but I was a good player. I used to play in the centre, but I noticed in my kind of mid-teens I started losing a lot of pace, twisting my ankle, spraining my ankle a lot. I couldn't kind of twist and turn like you should be able to in a rugby match. So I said it to my mum and my parents, and I suppose my mum would have been a nurse, so she kind of was suspecting something was wrong. But there was one particular occasion we were walking in town in Limerick, and I couldn't keep up with her walking, and she knew there was something wrong. So we went to see a neurologist in Cork, and pretty soon I was diagnosed with a muscle wasting condition, which is a form of muscular dystrophy. It's called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. So I suppose most people would know now, if they see me, from the knee down, my legs would be very, would be wasted. Whatever muscle is there doesn't work. It has no impact. And from my elbows down as well, my hands, the muscles in my lower arms would also be wasting. So, for example, things like doing up my kids' nappies, I find very difficult. We'll say zips, buttons, tying laces, even things like losing my grip now, I find that kind of thing is difficult. So I suppose for cycling, where I suppose obviously not having effective calf muscles is a big problem. Cycling, I suppose people don't think that the calves are used a lot, but they're about 10% or 10 to 15% of the pedal stroke power. But when you're sprinting, that's a lot higher. So in cycling, really, it hits me, certainly it causes me to lose a lot of power, and I'm very inefficient on the bike. But particularly sprinting, my kind of sprint and 1 minute power would be very low for someone who's racing at able to race at kind of A2, A1 level, So that would have been a big problem for me racing, is to try and kind of get around that fact, And
I mean, it sounds like from an early age, like you were driven and you were surrounded by competition. And I mean, did the disability then just drive you on further? Was it something that you were going to overcome? Like, because, to be at that level of fitness, to be able to drop into an A1 race and to hold it, is fairly spectacular.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't remember at the time, I suppose. I think when I was a kid, I kind of almost didn't believe it, I knew there was something going on, but I didn't believe it. I suppose in a way, one of the things I think that was that kind of kept me driven was at the time I got diagnosed, I had contrary medical advice. So one person was telling me that really, you shouldn't continue doing sports to a high level because it might exacerbate things. Whereas I had other medical advice, and thankfully my parents as well, who told me, listen, keep going, do whatever you want to do. And I think that has really helped me. And I think part of the reason why I suppose kept driving with it was because I always felt that that if I didn't, my condition would deteriorate far faster, than it has. And also it's hard, as you can imagine, like if you're, into playing sports and into the competition, it would have been hard just to give it up as a teenager, particularly, And so definitely, it never even occurred to me to kind of stop, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and your parents were really crucial in that and kind of encouraging you on instead of trying to wrap you in cotton wool.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely, they wouldn't have put any kind of barriers in my place. I wouldn't have said, don't try and do this or whatever. And I think that's crucial, just in general for anyone with a disability, to be honest, is to the issue of mobility for anyone who has a physical disability is really important. And I would say that to anyone that the more you can keep active, the more you can kind of move at whatever level you can. You don't have to obviously race A1 cycling or whatever, but it can have such a huge impact on your health overall. And to be honest, that goes for anyone, but particularly when you have a physical disability, it really makes a difference.
And where did the opportunity then to race paracycling come?
So the coach of the paracycling team is Neil Delahaye, who actually was, I don't know if you would know him, but he would have been one of the strongest race riders in Ireland over a long period of time in the 2000s. And in fact, I never forget a stage he won in Rossmoon, where he rode a break off his wheel into a headwind on Valentia Island and took the stage by about 2 minutes. It was phenomenal. But I met him at a race, and I can't remember exactly where, somewhere in 2014. And I mentioned to him, I met him through a project as an engineer that I was doing for a hand cyclist, Mark Rowan. And Mark had been competing with Ireland in paracycling as a hand cyclist for a number of years. And Cycling Ireland were looking at ways to kind of make the bike more efficient, more aerodynamic. So they got in contact with me. And through that, I suppose, I spoke to Mark and Neil, and I mentioned to Neil, he would have recognized me from the bunch, but I mentioned, like, I have this disability, and he kind of said, right. He said, that's interesting. And are you still racing A1? And I said, yeah. So within about a week or two, he had me on the Irish squad. And about 2 or 3 weeks after that first happened, I was on a plane going to the States to race the World Championships. So it happened literally that quickly. It was just almost overnight, That's
incredible. And you never thought of racing paracycling before that?
I didn't know a whole lot about it. I did actually apply to Paralympics Ireland before that, a good few years before that, but I didn't get anything back from them at the time. And I suppose I think that's something, in fairness to them, that they're definitely much more aware of nowadays, is trying to get people into it. But no, I suppose I hadn't. I suppose I was happy enough, and it's a regret I have, because I could have been racing it since the early 2000s, and winning medals since then. Because when I joined it, I suppose I was in my mid to late 30s, so I had probably gone past my peak, if you know what I mean. But still, though, for the period I was with them, it was a fantastic opportunity to get.
So you're 2 weeks, and then you're on a plane to the US?
Yeah, I almost didn't get into the plane, actually, because at the border in Shannon Airport, they wouldn't accept. I had problems explaining to them why I was going, and they almost didn't let me on the plane, to be honest. Really? But eventually, anyway, I got on the plane and flew over to Greenville in North Carolina, and I'd never raced.
Was it the US Customs basically wouldn't accept?
Yeah, I think it was the ESTA forms you have to do at the time. So I had filled out that, and it had been approved. But when I handed it in at the airport, and I've been to the US before that, they didn't like the amount of details I'd given on the address. But I was flying over my own. The rest of the team had gone over, and I couldn't get in contact with them. So the guys in Shannon were saying, the American border guard was saying, you're just not going on the flight. Eventually, anyway, they relented. But it was I was thinking, right, this is going to end before it has begun,
That must have been stressful, like.
It was stressful. I remember one occasion I was actually making a phone call trying to ring Cycling Ireland to try and get a few more details from them for the border guards, and I was using my phone just back from the border kiosks, and one of the border guards came over to me and told me in no uncertain terms that I couldn't be using a phone anywhere next or near them. Really? Pretty abruptly, Anyway, it worked out in the end, but it was definitely an interesting start to my paracycling career.
Jeez, I can imagine. And tell us about the US then.
So yeah, I suppose I flew over there and met the rest of the squad, and I suppose just a couple of days later, I had the time trial World Championships at the time, and I suppose the reason I was able to race was because Ireland had gained enough qualification points to have a certain amount of riders, and so then it's up to Cycling Ireland to pick whichever riders would go. So in paracycling, I suppose a bit the same with the World Championships. The country earns a certain amount of points, and depending on the points you go, Cycling Ireland pick the riders. So you might have earned the points, but it doesn't mean you'll actually be going, if you know what I mean. So someone might have missed out because they parachuted me in. But I borrowed, I didn't have a time trial bike, so I had to borrow it from Tony Burke, who's in Galway Bay Cycling Club. I borrowed his bike and brought it over. And when I see the images of me in that particular race, I was not at all aerodynamic. I mean, it was disgraceful, but anyway, I won it by 20 seconds at the time trial. But I mean, I would have been strong. I would have been like time trial kind of efforts would have been good, very good for me. So I won it over a Russian guy by about 20 seconds, and I really didn't know what to think. I didn't know should I be going there to win, or was I just turning up to make up numbers, or because I had no idea how good these guys were, in my category.
But the level that you were cycling at home, was, national standard.
It was, but for example, so in paracycling, you have the cycling categories. You have 5 categories. So a C5 are the least disabled, and C1s are the most disabled. A C1 rider, for example, might have, like a Spanish guy, has one arm and one leg, and he rides a normal bike like you or I do. Pretty fast as well. It's pretty amazing. I would have been C3, so my disability would be moderate. But in the C5 category, you had guys who were racing the Jacob Hurl Sun Tour, the Tour Down Under, but they might have a deformity with their arm or something. So these guys are racing with professional, in professional races, fully professional races. And in my category, there would have been 2 Belgian riders who were former pros who had various accidents and couldn't ride pro anymore. So basically, I suppose to win in my category, you have to be kind of A1. So
once you joined the Irish squad, were you subject then to anti-doping and all that kind of side of things?
Yeah. Actually, we would have obviously had to join the whereabouts scheme, where you have to give your location every day, and within that you have to give 1 hour of the day where you will be in a precise spot that you can be tested. And so what happens basically is you're tested randomly throughout the year, a minimum of 4 blood samples, 4 urine samples every year, but you'll obviously get tested in excess of that as well, competition and other stuff. Those are the minimum number of out-of-competition tests. So, it was quite tricky just to balance that with work. You have to really plan ahead. If you say you're going to be in a certain place and they turn up and you're not there, that's a strike. If you get 3 of those, it's a ban, automatic ban, equivalent to a doping ban.
You're a professional full-time cyclist. It's a lot easier to know where you're going to be. But if you're you're lecturing, you're working, your family, all kinds of stuff, it's much more difficult then, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very tricky. And I've actually an example of how, in fairness, how well the system operates in Ireland. I had a lot of confidence in it. But there was one particular, on a Thursday, I had to go back to Limerick at the last minute on the Friday. So I changed my whereabouts form online and changed my whereabouts to Limerick. So I arrived back in Limerick on the Friday evening at around 8 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. My mother had answered me, and it was 2 people from anti-doping who arrived to our house in the middle of rural Limerick.
Landed down in Bruff.
And I'm not certain why they tested, but it could have been because I changed at short notice. So they might have, that kind of is a bit interesting. Let's see what's happening there. And so they landed down. So, I think it's something actually I learned.
With a cup, says these lads want you to wee in that.
Well, yeah, they have to watch it coming out of you. I mean, they have to see it. I mean, there's there's no kind of hiding it in any way. They have to see the
What,
whole
did they use a
thing.
mirror or something, or
No. They
crouch
look at you.
down?
They literally stand, and you have to stand in such a way that they can see it. And they do it, but they're very nice. It's very, very professionally done, I have to say.
Yeah. You don't get stage fright, no?
But the first time, I got tested, they arrived at about 8 o'clock one evening, and they didn't get the urine sample till about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they had to leave then.
You're not surprised someone looking at you trying to pee.
Yeah. Once I kind of got used to it. Now, one thing that's tricky is after a race, obviously, it can be tricky, and you have to be careful not to drink too much, because if you dilute the sample too much, they can't use it. You'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
The blood samples obviously are a lot easier. That can be done. But again, for example, for the blood sample, I used to cycle to work and home. And once I cycled home from work, it's only like 10 minutes easy cycle, but they arrived just after I came home. But because I had been moving before they came in, exercising, they had to wait. I think it was 2 hours before they could take the blood sample. Yeah. So there's a lot in it. And I have to say that the Irish system was, when I started talking to some of my competitors abroad, I could see that the Irish system is a lot more stringent and, applied in professionally compared to a lot of other countries,
Yeah.
Let's hope some of the other countries catch up on that.
Yeah. No mention the Russians.
Yeah, well, they were actually banned, but actually in the Paralympics just before it kicked off, there was an Australian guy, Michael Gallagher, C5 athlete, very well known guy who tested positive for EPO.
Really?
So it's not just it's cross paracycling as well, unfortunately.
Was there much support from Paracycling Ireland? Was there like an elite sort of training camps or support from coaches?
Yeah, no, it was a very professional setup. I have to say, it was a complete change to what I was doing before. I used to go out and just do a huge amount of mileage or whatever, but now the training was very structured. I started doing the track as well around that time. They wanted me to do the track, so started doing a lot more gym work and learned a huge amount about training, nutrition. We had Cycling Ireland have training camps in a house over in Majorca. We used to go there because there's a track there. Of course, we don't have a velodrome in Ireland. So I spent a good bit of time training over there and traveling to World Cups. We had, mechanics, nutritional support, physio support. So, and being honest, even with all that, we it would be heavily underfunded compared to the bigger nations, But I have to say the setup was excellent and really professional. It was the same setup for us as it is for the international riders. Like Ryan Mullen would have been over training in Mallorca at the same time as I was, and we would have had the same setup.
Great. So you were able to gain from that, from those other athletes as well as the coaches.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I have to say it was really brilliant setup. And then you had the riders who were already on the paracycling team, and I joined, like a guy called Mark Rowan, who would have been a hand cyclist, and he would be probably the most professional athlete I've ever met. You had I suppose the female tandem currently, Katie George Dunleavy and Eve Crystal, who are still racing as well. Eve nationally is one of the strongest female riders nationally, has won obviously national time trial champs, etc. So, it was a really good setup.
But that's one thing really that just kind of brought home to me, is that when you mentioned paracycling, like there's such a crossover between that and elite cycling, because there's a various level category of disabilities that a lot of people wouldn't kind of realize.
Yeah. One of the biggest names in paracycling is Sarah Story, who a lot of people might have heard of, a British rider. And she regularly competes in top female professional races. Obviously she races at what we call the C5, so the least disabled category. But on the current Irish squad, for example, there's a C4 rider, which would be, we'll say, one category less disabled, if you want to call it, than me, Ronan Grimes. And he's a very strong A1 rider at the moment. So, in a way, before the national riding for me was what I did. From 2014 to 2016, it became what I did to get me in shape for paracycling, believe it or not. And
then you also being a trained engineer, civil engineer, would that be right?
That's right.
I suppose you couldn't help but apply that to your cycling.
Yeah, I suppose in one way, I'm very unanalytical when it comes to training. I like to kind of do my own thing when it comes to training, but in other ways, you know, I would really have a lot of interest in aerodynamics. I suppose on the track, that's so important. You know, it really is. It's so important to spend a lot of time getting the aerodynamics right, getting your equipment right, the bike right, your position right, and looking at all the numbers to make sure that if you are aerodynamic, that you're also putting out the power as well. So you need to get the trade-off between those two. And I have to say, it's for me as an engineer, but in general, it's a really interesting area. And I think the other area as well would have been the issue around, I suppose, strength and conditioning again. I was lucky enough to be able to attend UL over those years. Tom Commons, who used to do the strength conditioning for Munster, would have done a lot of work with me on strength and conditioning in UL. And again, you know, just a whole attitude of trying to measure everything, trying to, I suppose, you know, make sure that everything you're doing is to increase your performance. You know, something that as an engineer I thought was, you know, it made sense to me to do it that way.
Yeah. And like, have we any wind tunnels in Ireland or access to those kind of resources?
No, we don't. No. So actually, I've done some work with Cycling Ireland in this area as well, and we'd have used wind tunnels in Belgium and in the Netherlands, and there are obviously wind tunnels in the UK as well. But yeah, in Ireland we wouldn't have any wind tunnels which would be capable of doing that type of work.
Yeah, it must be great to have access to that, to be able to see, you know, try out different positions and just to see what works, and, you know, just to see the watts going up and down. It must be fascinating from the point of view as an engineer, because I mean, cycling has become so science-based these days. Every watt is important. Every inch of your body and your bike exposed to the wind.
You kind of, I suppose, you have to look at every detail. And I remember one change we made in my position was simply instead of grabbing the skis, so the on the time trial bike, with my full hand, I would grab them just with my baby finger on the velodrome. So it was quite unstable, but of course it's in the time trial race, so I was on my own. That ended up lowering my head. I was also able to keep out the power, and it would have saved me the equivalent of about, I think it was 10 or 15 watts at the time, which if I was to do that, try and increase that in my, you know, functional threshold power, would have been at that stage almost impossible, because it would have been too big a leap. So, you know, it is worth definitely investing the time in that, particularly for those types of events.
But that's massive. Like, that's 10 or 15 watts is massive when you're probably just at your peak of fitness at that point. You know, you're trying to get those little margins, and I
wouldn't at that stage. I wouldn't have been able to get that from training. You know, you know, it wouldn't have been feasible. So, and with that, once we saw that position, we actually went back to the gym, and I was doing specific work to enable me to hold a position even when you're very fatigued towards the end of the race, so that you keep the power out and don't move up your head or ruin the position. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. Once you find a position, you don't just sit in it and then it's all dandy. You have to actually work to make sure that you're able to hold it as well.
Do you have to work really to kind of reorientate the focus on certain muscles and certain, like how certain muscles fire? You know, when you change your body position, the way that your muscles operate, it kind of changes too, doesn't it?
Yeah, and particularly for, I suppose, someone like me who has, you know, no lower legs to speak of, you know, you have to be quite careful of that as well. And but yeah, like one regret I suppose I would have had over my career was that if I had known the benefits of doing additional strength and conditioning, core work in particular, things like that, I would have been doing less cycling and more of that. Nowadays, I suppose if I was to go back racing like that full time, you know, I wouldn't do the amount of time I was doing on the bike. You know, I would do a lot more. And it was that period with Cycling Ireland where I really learned that you know, for me anyway, I had done enough time on the bike. You know, I didn't need to be flogging myself 7 days a week, but there were other areas where I needed to actually improve, particularly in that area of strength conditioning.
And would that be kind of heavyweight strength, or would that be more kind of Pilates kind of stuff, you know, using your own body weight, or what really worked for you?
Like for the track, we had to do heavy stuff because you have to get out of the start gate, and those first 10 pedal strokes just are, you know, you're in a big, massive gear. You're in a 50-11 or 51-11, and you have to get out of the gate. Here on
the little screen. I was watching it. I was watching. Let me see it over my shoulder here.
Oh yeah.
But you're just from a standing start and grinding.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you're really grinding, and you have to get up for those events. The better you can get up to speed from that start, the better your time will be overall. It's that initial 3/4 of a lap when you're out of the saddle that really determines what's going to happen in the rest of the race almost. And if you get the timing wrong when the gate opens by a fraction of a second, you've lost the race. You really have to get the timing right. The minute the gate opens to let you go, you have to go. Otherwise, you'll just lose everything. So we would have worked a lot on, I suppose, leg power insofar as we could with my condition. And then core muscles in particular, so that when you do put down the power, that you tense the core muscles, you're not losing any power anywhere. And then done a good bit of upper body work as well. Yeah. So on that, and
you'd use a lot of upper body, would you? When you're going from a standing start like that, you really have to engage your arms and your core, do you?
Yeah. You throw your whole body forward in time when the gate opens. So you anticipate the gate opening and you throw your body forward. And so that when the gate opens, your momentum is pushing you out with your legs. And you do push forward, you drive forward with your arms there as well, you know. And I suppose for road cycling, a lot of that is still relevant, but probably you don't need to do the big weights, big, huge weights. But you still, I firmly believe, you know, you need to challenge yourself when it comes to weights, even if you're a road cyclist, if you have the equipment, you know.
Yeah.
But even heavy bands and things will allow you to do that.
It's actually a real challenge for people during the pandemic, getting access to heavy weights. You know, like if you're squatting big weights, you need a rack. So people are trying to make the best of the weights they have at home. You know, so a lot of that large strength kind of training, people are trying to compensate in certain ways.
Yeah, I suppose, and there's ways you can, like maybe not fully, but definitely bands, using a lot of bands as well is a really good way. And I'd still try and, just for my own general fitness, I would do a lot of that. But like I know myself, when I'm, you know, if you have kids as well, you can use them as a bit of extra weight if you need to. But definitely it is good. Like I know for road cyclists, the tendency in the past would have been just to do a lot of miles on the bike and not do anything else. But I think that's genuinely changing. A lot of road cyclists now know that they have to kind of mix it a bit, particularly in the off season.
Yeah. And tell us about how your career paracycling then kind of evolved with the other World Championships and going to the Paralympics in Rio.
Yeah, so I would have spent from 2014 to 2016 on the squad. In 2015, 2014 there, I won the road racing time trial in America, and then obviously went and did some World Cup events. And in the time trials, I didn't lose a time trial over my career in the paracycling until my very last one, actually. But I got a bronze medal then in the track World Championships, and the two guys who beat me for gold and silver were the two guys who would constantly beat me for that in the next few years. So I took a lot of pleasure in beating them in the time trial on the road. 2015, I won the time trial again, and I won the scratch race, which is just a race I love on the track. It's like a demolition derby on the track. No brakes, as you know, a single speed gear in the bike, and riders flying up and down the track, over and back. And I absolutely.
How do you stop?
That was one of. Yep.
How do you stop?
You don't. Once you cross the finish line, you kind of push. You slow your pedaling rate. Yeah. But it actually taught me a lot of bike skills. I'm a much better bike handler for having done those races. Because you have to anticipate what other riders are going to do, because you can't pull on the brakes, you know.
Is it like a fixie kind of a?
It's fixie. Yeah, you can't stop. If you stop pedaling, you'll be thrown off the bike. It's fixie. And that was a great race for me.
So many accidents on the track.
I had two big ones. One of them, I think, a ski on the pursuit bike just wasn't clamped tight enough, and it just dropped in the middle of a big effort, and I came down. And the second one, I think, a pedal came off. And that one was painful. I scraped the entirety of one side of my body, and because the track is wood, the pedal tore up splinters, which got lodged in me, and so that was fun picking those out. That was a nasty crash, but apart in racing and in the scratch races, I never had a crash. But it was a race that very much suited me. I really I love it. You know, I love watching it now, even on the road or on the TV, I should say.
Yeah. I suppose the old racing with Galway Bay got you ready for that anyway. elbow
Yeah,
to
but I
elbow.
tell you, it is very different, and it's something that, you know, people talk about cyclocross and mountain biking for the bike handling skills, but the scratch racing, that type of racing on the track as well, is absolutely brilliant for being able to handle a bike. It's you know, I know it brought me on a lot. I'm actually a better bike handler now than I was in my 20s.
Yeah. And with Rio, then, were you had some injuries, had you, heading into that?
Yeah, I suppose I started developing a lot of back problems. I suppose partly probably because my muscles are continuously wasting. So things like walking, standing in my job would have, you know, caused me a lot of problems. And I've herniated. I had a number of herniated discs, so it was extremely painful. The most painful thing I've ever had, to be honest. But yeah, so 2016 was a struggle leading into Rio. I was still going well into time trials, but you know, I was really struggling in training on the track. I wasn't producing good times at all, and particularly the time trial position was hurting me, you know.
Yeah.
So when I got to Rio, yeah, the previous training camp we had done in Portugal, in terms of the track training camp just before Rio, didn't really go very well for me at all, you know. And I wasn't, I suppose I wasn't full of confidence. I knew on the road I'd always be okay on the road race because I'm strong enough. I knew that I'd always be okay there, but I was very worried about the time trial and the pursuit ahead of Rio.
Yeah. And how did you fare out?
Well, in the pursuit, like, I ended up getting the bronze. I wasn't happy with it. I think it would have been a challenge for me to get a gold or silver, because the two guys who got them, for me it was 3 kilometers. Maybe a 4 kilometer race would have suited me better, and they were always better than me at it, being honest. But I felt at my best. I could have pushed them. The first track race I ever did actually was in 2014. I had never done one before, and I turned up at a competition as part of the paracycling squad. And in the final of that particular event in the pursuit, I passed out the guy I was racing the final against. And a gun went, because once you pass out the rider, the race is over. I didn't realize that I could have continued riding to set a time. So I just eased up because I was finished. If I had continued riding, I probably would have been close to the world record at that time. But I never got that back again. And I think what we learned afterwards was probably I needed to train less on the track than I did. So in Rio, I came third in the pursuit, and I wasn't very happy with it, and I wasn't very happy with my performance. But lucky enough, the road time trial was the next event, and I did a lot of physio between the two events. And after about, you know, a kilometer out of the 30-kilometer time trial, I knew I was going to win it. And it might sound bad, or it might sound arrogant, but, you know, if you get on your bike and you have one of those days, I just got into the position, the legs were turning, and I said, yeah, unless I crash, I can't, you know, the guys aren't going to beat me today. And I ended up.
You need that, don't you, as a cyclist? Like, you need that.
Yeah.
To be at that level, you need that level of determination and will and belief. Yeah,
and actually I nearly mucked it up, because the Australian guy who won the gold medal in the pursuit was my 2-minute man in the time trial, and with about 10k to go, I was going to catch him for 2 minutes, which meant, you know, as you know yourself, I was, you know, really hammering him.
Yeah.
And I wanted to pass him out. I was, you know, desperate to pass him out, just so that he'd see me pass him out. I went around a U-turn on the course, and I switched gears while around the bend, which of course was very stupid, so that when I jumped out of the bend, my chain fell off. So I had to get off the bike. The guys had to run out from my car, fix the chain, because it was kind of caught on the inside of the cassette. And unfortunately, I nearly caught him again before the line, but I didn't. And I was raging with myself. But anyway, I won the race. So it didn't matter in the end. I had a healthy margin of victory. But it's funny, when I crossed the line, I was furious that I hadn't caught him. Which, you know, I suppose it was a bit stupid when you look back on it.
Yeah.
And the road race then, I suppose, yeah, that went well for me. But unfortunately, there was 5 of us got away in a break, and in the sprint to the line, my chain came off, and I came 5th of the 5. So I had bad luck in that race, and I was pretty confident of doing a decent sprint that day. But anyway, that's unfortunately the way it went.
But you probably underplayed you overcame serious pain and injury leading up to that, you know, so when you got out on the road, like, you were just absolutely driven.
Yeah, and during the race, you'd have the power meter on, but I didn't even have the screen on. I wouldn't look at it. But I knew I was in in good form, and I had to do it because if someone had said to me, "You go to Rio and not win a gold medal," I wouldn't have gone. You know, if they told me in advance. And it might sound bad because people say, "Well, what about the experience?" But there's so much effort in getting there, and there's so much effort, and in training, you're missing family. I was juggling work and training and trips abroad, and
what do you really sacrifice? Like, to give people an idea, you know, people think go train, you go cycling a bike is great, but like, what is that sacrifice?
Like some of it is fantastic, you know, that the kind of full-time life, being able to train full-time is fantastic. But I suppose one thing I didn't do was I didn't give up work for those few years. And so even when we were over on training camps, etc., we'd be doing a track session of a number of hours. You'd have a couple of hours on the road bike on the same day. So a lot of training and gym work as well. And then I was trying to squeeze in, you know, staying on top of work. Obviously, I in 2015, my first child was born, and I missed her birth because I was flying home from a competition in Japan. And she was very young, obviously, at that time. So it put a lot of pressure on, I suppose, home as well. And like, it's definitely, you know, I have huge respect for people who do commit over the years to it, you know, and particularly people, I suppose, who maybe have kids, etc. You know, it does make it a lot harder because, you know, I suppose people don't realize, but when you're, you know, doing the paracycling races, if you want to win the medals, you have to do it full time. You know, you can't take any half measures.
And getting back to, you know, what family life and getting back home, what was the kind of reason that you retired from competing at that level?
Yeah, I kept going to 2017, but I had to have 2 procedures in my back in 2017, and I suppose in my last race, I lost a time trial, which was the first one I'd ever lost. And I went on the next day to win the road race. I was so mad with losing the time trial that I went off on my own in the road race and won it. But I felt I was really kind of, you know, I was taking the last dregs out of the well, to be honest. I was in constant pain, and with work and family, etc. I suppose our second child was also born, that I just felt it was the right time to stop. And I had been, you know, competing for a long time internationally as well, so I felt it was the right time, and to be honest, I think it was the best decision, you know. Because for a couple of years, for 2008, 17 or 18 and 19, you know, I struggled a lot on the bike, and I think if I kept on racing, you know, could have done maybe, you know, more damage.
Yeah. And you know, like when you retired, I mean, that kind of love of cycling kind of continues. I mean, how important is it to kind of keep in with the club, keep cycling, supporting the club, and, you know, being involved in cycling?
Yeah, for me, it's great. Like, I mean, we've such a great group around here, just around Galway in general, and in fact around Connacht, I have to say, in general, but around the city, it's fantastic. What's been a great motivator as well, apart from obviously keeping in touch with the guys you would have been cycling for a long time, is just the new people who are coming on the scene in terms of racing and trying to, well, not catch them because that's almost impossible, but at least try and, you know, remain competitive with them. It kind of gives you a new spark and new motivation.
Being modest now, you're dropping lads left, right, and centre on the.
Well, I don't know about that, but you know, that's kind of what you need. You need those motivations, and I suppose there's a great social element to the training as well. You know, it's, for me, it'll be hard to envisage a life without kind of cycling. You know, it's and for me also, it's just a way of getting around the city. It's a way of, it's not just about training. It's just the bike is this great invention that, you know, for someone like me who can't walk very easily, it gives me mobility around the place in a way that, you know, I suppose otherwise I mightn't have. So yeah, it's something, yeah, I'll always be at.
And what made you get back into competing in the local club leagues there last year?
Yeah, so actually, as I said, I struggled a lot 2018, 19. I was really struggling on the bike, and I wasn't enjoying it a whole lot. And then the lockdown came, and I suppose during the lockdown I got a chance to kind of start training it a bit better. You know, I was working from home. I started kind of going back to scratch and training a little bit. And I found in March and April that I started to get, you know, really fit, and the kind of, you know, I just felt the legs were coming around again. So the guys were telling me that they had been doing this challenge, you know, the Challenge League over the last couple of years. I would have always done the Galway Bay League as well, obviously, over the years, which was a fantastic training league as well. And so they were kind of pestering me to go. So I said I tried out, but I was expecting to be hockeyed altogether, And so I started off with the, I suppose, the A3, A4 bunch. But I was kind of surprised that I was, the first race or two, I was going well, and I was, able to get up the road and stay up the road in one of the races with one of the other lads in the club. So then I was enjoying it. I suppose I was enjoying it because the legs were pretty good. And I started, obviously I moved up to the A1, A2 bunch, and I was again expecting to get trolleyed there. But then I found actually, it's hard, but I can stay. I'm competitive, so and it's fantastic. For me, it's close. It's an hour away. The races are an hour and a bit. It's a Thursday evening. It's not like traveling all over the country at weekends. You're not missing the family, etc. So I think they're, fair play to the people who organise these leagues, both Galway Bay and also the Challenge guys, because it's a lot of work, but it's a fantastic outlet, it really is.
Yeah. And it's great to be able to mix with lads from other clubs and, people that you've raced with before or cycled with. It's, there's a whole social element to it. And, hopefully that comes back again sooner rather than later. Yeah,
there is. Yeah. I met a lot of guys I hadn't seen in a good few years, and it's great, and it's just also great to kind of see the younger lads kind of coming on the scene, see how well they're going, etc. And so yeah, it's brilliant, and let's hope May June we can get back to it again.
Yeah, and like this pandemic has, talking to anyone who owns a bike shop, like they're just been flat out, selling bikes and repairing bikes, and there's been a huge uptake in cycling during the pandemic. Has it really brought home to you, and you've kids as well, I know today, do you have them out cycling, or has it really brought home to you or showed you, have you been impressed about how popular cycling has become during this pandemic?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think the first lockdown was very tough, obviously, but from a point of view of the roads being empty, it was great for kids and cycling. And that's when my daughter now is 5, but she started kind of cycling during the first lockdown. And yesterday she cycled 20 kilometers, not in one go now. There was a few little stops, but it's great. What I've noticed really is, well, for me, what's most important is to see kids cycling to school. Now there isn't enough of it. I wish there was a lot more, and hopefully that'll change. But even, I do see it in local schools, a lot more kids cycling to school, and that's really where it starts, because once it's ingrained in them as a habit, as a mode of transport, as something for leisure purposes, everything else follows from that. I really think that, and I think I hope this boom continues for the bike industry, because like Ireland badly needs this. Badly needs cities where people can cycle around, where kids can be allowed to cycle around alone, etc. It makes such a difference for a city when that can happen.
And in Ireland, our cycling infrastructure is fairly woeful, isn't it? I mean, with regard to greenways and with regard to cycle lanes, all this kind of stuff. I mean, what do you think should be done?
Well, yeah, I would be quite critical of the state of our bike networks. I mean, I'm lucky enough at work. I get to travel a bit to other countries, and in 2018 I was living in Poland for 8 months, working over there in a city called Wrocław, and even though there's a lot of improvements they would need, but compared to Ireland, that city was light years ahead in terms of bike infrastructure. I see it in the Netherlands. I just think we need a complete change. I mean, we will always need cars. That's absolutely a given. That's, people will always need them for various reasons. But any city that I know of that has changed the main modes of transport in the city themselves, the central areas of cities, from away from cars to walking and cycling, they would never go back. They wouldn't. And I know obviously we're on the West Coast, there's bad weather and the other things, but we just need to see change in how we see a city. And for me, the most important thing is that within 10 or 15 minutes of your house in most cities, you should be able to walk or cycle to almost any facility. That's really... And for people with disabilities, and I hope you don't mind me going back there again, it just is so important, because, they wouldn't have the confidence. There's a person who lives near me who uses an electric wheelchair, and that person, the footpaths are too narrow for them. So that person's going up and down Clybourne Road, on the road, with cars whizzing by in an electric wheelchair. And I just think in this day and age, that's just shocking, And, that can't be comfortable for that person to get out and be mobile and active, etc. And let's hope over the next few years that things change. I think they will. I think they will have to,
Yeah, there are some moves being made, but there's a long way to go, isn't there, to go be anywhere like some of the cities on the continent.
Oh yeah, a very long way to go. We really do. But I know Seville, for example, in Spain, is one city that has not overnight, but within a couple of years has transformed the city, and from a city that was very congested to a city now that has just a huge amount of cycling facilities, and it's been a great success. So it can be done. There's no question.
Well, hopefully the council will start with putting a bike lane along the promenade. So easy,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And but I think it has to happen. It will happen, and I just hope it's sooner rather than later.
Because there's an opportunity, isn't there, for not just for competitive cycling and for mountain biking and gravel bike, but there's an opportunity to use the fact that people have really got into exercise and cycling and things like this, to make something good out of a bad situation, that we bring this momentum along and it's not lost. And especially for the cycling clubs, that they have the opportunity to, it's a resource that's already there to bring those people along, encourage them cycling.
Yeah. And actually, on the cycle school buses that have been organised in Galway, the one in Knocknacarra, I know that a lot of the members of Galway Bay would have been some of the cyclists helping, I suppose, that school bus and organising it, etc. And I agree with you. I think, if you were to come out of this lockdown and the city was to go back to the way it was, and I'm talking about Galway, congested, etc., no real changes in how we move about the city, it would be a shame. And you do see in Dublin, they've made a lot of changes to Dublin city. So, it would be a fantastic legacy to come out of this with real concrete short-term plans that would kind of change the way, we move around the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you one thing. I don't know if you want to be asked for this or not, but the velodrome that's in the National Development Plan has been put on review, but yet we have a whitewater rafting proposal that's still going ahead for Dublin. What do you think about that?
Okay, on the whitewater rafting thing, I don't know enough about it. I think, in fairness to it, there's a lot of disagreement. I think there's an element that, part of the reason it's I suppose maybe going ahead is because of broader social benefits it might bring to that community. I don't know. On the velodrome, the mind boggles, because cycling has been one of the most successful sports in terms of international medals over the last number of years. Not just paracycling has been phenomenally successful, but if you look at the cycling scene as well, if you look at the amount of Irish athletes that have won World Cups, look at Martin Irvine's gold and silver medals, World Championship medals, Ryan Mullins, Sam Bennett, all these people came. Sam Bennett has European track medals. It's just, there has been a huge amount of people that have come through the track scene, and what Irish athletes are having to do are go abroad to train for the track. And there's no country that competes for medals that I'm aware of. If you look at the Danes, the English, New Zealand, Australia, I can list them all, and they all train at home in their own velodromes.
Yeah.
And sorry, if I could just say as well, the broader benefits that would bring, just for the public. The velodrome is a very safe, brilliant way to get kids into cycling as well, which it's used in other countries as that. So for me, it's a project that should go ahead.
Yeah, fantastic resource and great spectator sport too.
It was, like in Rio, our the velodrome was absolutely jammers for our races. It was fantastic, and if you've ever watched, as I said, the scratch races, for example, or the tandems, when you have the tandem riders flying around over a kilometre effort at 80 kilometres an hour, it's a sight to behold. So it's really exciting. And one thing I'd love to do is go to a 6-day event over in Belgium. I've never been to one, but it's definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, they serve beer in them too.
Well, that's part of the reason.
Just bringing you on there to where we are now with pro cycling. It's a pretty good time to be following pro cycling, both as an Irish person watching Sam Bennett, Ryan Mullins and all these guys, and as well, there's just so much going on. There's such competition, in pro cycling. The races so far this year, the one-day classics, even Paris-Nice, and that have been brilliant. You don't know who's going to win from one day to the next. There's no one being dominant. Are you following the pro racing at the moment?
Yeah. I was lucky enough today. It was raining, so I was inside with the kids, and I was watching Tirreno Adriatico. where Van der Poel nearly got pipped at the line by Pogačar. But I mean, it's phenomenal the change in scene in the pro scene. You know, guys like Pogačar, Bernal, obviously Van der Poel, Van Aert have come along. You know, massively talented, and I suppose the way they race as well, you know, is just different. They don't mind taking the races on, you know, which is phenomenal. And I think we're finally starting to see Sam Bennett get the due, you know, kind of credit that he deserves. I mean, you know, yesterday in the break, he was up the road all day. He's won 4 World Tour races this season, the green jersey last year. I mean, Ireland doesn't produce that many athletes that are able to compete at that level in any sport internationally. And it's you know, hopefully his season continues in this way, because he's the man to beat in the sprints.
Yeah, and a real inspiration, like for young Irish cyclists.
Absolutely, yeah, and a great character, you know, a great character as well. Like he's, you know, I suppose the way he praises his team, it almost seems as if he had to do nothing to win the race, you know, at the end. And I mean, it's a great thing to have. I mean, you know, and I think his teammates appreciate that as well. And you know, it is fantastic just to see. I mean, someone, you know, like him just get to the very top of the sport. You know, it does mean that we can produce those athletes.
So what are you looking forward to the year ahead? Is it more racing or cycling with the kids, or?
Yeah, definitely the latter. Hopefully the racing scene, hopefully the Challenge League, etc., gets up and running again. That'll be fantastic. I'm really looking forward, obviously to the pro scene for the rest of the year, to see how Bennett and Dan Martin, Roach, Ryan Mullen, Dunbar get on. And definitely really looking forward to Tokyo. You know, I really want to see how the paracycling squad get on this year. There's been a few new athletes come into the scene, and the level is just constantly increasing there. So I'm just hoping that the Olympics and Paralympics can go ahead, so that, you know, we can see them in action.
Fantastic. Yeah, I hope so too. Well, look, Eoghan, it's been a real pleasure talking to you now, and thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks very much, Richie, and no problem at all.